people,
Good afternoon
infrastructure.
and welcome to Sound Off, the North County's local talk forum and the longest running radio talk show in the county. Sound Off is here to allow you to participate in discussing the issues and ideas of the times. The opinions expressed on Sound Off are those of the speaker and don't necessarily reflect those of KPRL's staff or management. Now here's your host for this afternoon's Sound Off, Ron Fisher.
There's an issue that's being hotly debated at times in the state legislature in Washington, D.C. It's an issue that can be a bit inflammatory, for lack of a better term, and one that can create some pretty strong opinions on one side of it or the other, and that is of the proposed constitutional amendment to ban flag desecration. That's what we're going to talk about this afternoon. Our guest is Lee Harris. He is with the national headquarters of the American Legion, and we want to invite your calls in here, 238-5775, 238-KPRL, if you have any questions or if you have any just some comments that you would like to make. Mr. Harris, thanks for being with us. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Ron, for asking me. What can I do for you?
Well, you can tell it. Well, let's start this off, because I don't actually know that I've ever actually read the wording in this proposed amendment.
Oh, it's very basic. I think it's 17 words, give or take a word, and it reads: the Congress shall have power to prohibit the physical desecration of the flag of the United States. Period, close quote, end of bill.
That seems to leave a lot of area open when you say that Congress has a power. Well, obviously, we're not going to send our Congress people out on the streets looking for people burning flags. So, that seems a little bit vague, or at least general, for lack of.
Well, actually, it's not vague at all. It's very, very specific. It doesn't give them much leeway whatsoever to do anything other than to prohibit the physical desecration of the flag. And what it really is all about, Ron, is it is about returning to you and I, the people of the United States, the right that we had for 200 years prior to the Supreme Court decision of 1989, which found that flag desecration is a protected form of free speech. And before that, 48 states and the federal government had laws on the books that made desecration of the flag was a crime, usually punishable by a small fine, and these were upheld by 5 previous Supreme Court decisions, and over that period of 150 to 200 years, freedom of speech certainly flourished in the United States. And so this whole effort, which has continued since 1989, is nothing more than an exercise laid out by the founding fathers of our country to return the right of the people, the right to protect their flag, and that's what it's been all about, and that's what we're doing.
Where does the debate stand right now? Where are things? I know there have been...
Well, things are very good. We're with, it has cleared the House last year in a supermajority vote, more than the 2/3 necessary. The Senate Judiciary Committee has recommended it or moved it through the committee to the full Senate floor. It hasn't been scheduled for debate or vote yet, but the Senate Judiciary Committee heard final hearings and voted in the last couple of weeks on that. We believe that we're within a couple of votes within the Senate of having this pass in the Senate. When it passes in the Senate, what that means is the same thing any other constitutional amendment means. It comes back to the states for ratification. It has to be ratified by 2/3 of the states within a 7-year period of time. If it does, we now have an amendment to the Constitution that does absolutely nothing, does not even create a law. All it does is provide Congress with the power to create a law, and it will be found constitutional. That's all it does. So in other words, even passing the amendment and adopting the amendment doesn't create a law. There's still a legislative process to go through after that.
Well, maybe we can get to that point in a few minutes. But you brought up the First Amendment issue, and why the Supreme Court ruled on that issue. Why don't you see such a constitutional amendment or a law being unconstitutional under that provision?
Well, first of all, the First Amendment gives you the right of speech and assembly. It doesn't give you the right to actions. And we do not believe that desecration of the flag, and let's not get caught up in just burning of the flag. Mm-hmm. Let's also accept the fact that defecating on a flag and leaving it on the public golf course clubhouse steps, let's say stuffing it in a toilet and putting it in a cage and calling it a piece of artwork, let's say laying it on the floor and inviting people to walk across it to write their thoughts in a book about it, are all acts of intentional desecration of the flag. And so it's not just flag burning, as a lot of people say. What happened was that the Supreme Court in 1989 actually changed the Constitution without the vote of the people by ruling that this is protected free speech. Up until that point, for 200 years, flag desecration had not been allowed in this country. And so what we are trying to do is get back the right. And we're not amending the First Amendment. We are creating a 28th Amendment, which will provide a special niche in the Constitution for the American flag.
How do you figure that the Supreme Court changed the Constitution? Where in the Constitution is this issue dealt with?
Where does the Constitution ever talk about freedom of expression? It doesn't. Freedom of expression is all through interpretation of the First Amendment over the last 40 years by the U.S. Supreme Court. And it is the Supreme Court that ruled that freedom of expression holds out to the flag. Therefore, the Founding Fathers didn't see it this way. They all said, in fact, they were even stronger. I believe it was Madison who said that an attack, the burning of the flag or desecration of the flag was equal to an attack on the country. So our Founding Fathers certainly never intended that freedom of speech would be translated into freedom of expression 200 years later. Somewhere down the line, Ron, you have a broadcast job. I have come from a broadcast background. You are not free to say anything that you want on the air. And we can always talk about the George Carlin words that
seven dirty words.
The 7 dirty words. But you are not free because you are a responsible broadcaster to say what you really want to say on the air. And we believe that that's the way it has to be in a good democracy. You can't just throw a temper tantrum. You can't be totally disrespectful. You cannot be just malicious in everything you do and be a responsible citizen.
Well, you raise a couple issues, but I want to go back to my question. When you say that the Supreme Court in this ruling changed the Constitution, how did it change the Constitution?
It changed the Constitution by the way they interpreted it. The Constitution does not say anything about free expression. The Constitution says freedom of speech, press, and assembly. Where does it say expression? It doesn't. And through their rulings, they changed the Constitution.
Well, okay, I guess that's...
They changed it in their own interpretations.
With the interpretation, does it say anywhere in the Constitution that you shouldn't be able to burn a flag?
Yeah, but does it say anywhere in the Constitution that that's the whole thing? They ruled in the 1989 Supreme Court decision, ruled the laws unconstitutional because there was no specific provision in the Constitution prohibiting flag desecration. And so therefore they found that it was freedom of expression. But freedom of expression does not exist in the First Amendment. Freedom of speech does.
Okay, let's go to the phones.
Okay.
Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. I think that passing this amendment, the law to ban desecration of the flag, is actually desecrating what the principles that the flag stands for, and the reason we all hold it so dear is the fact that you can burn the flag in this country. To me, I look at that, look, I'm a veteran, I love this country, but when I look at someone burning the flag, in a way, I feel like that reinforces the flag, that it reinforces the principles that it stands for. And recently President Clinton went to China, and we heard much ado about how the Chinese government was rounding up dissidents, how this evil communist country was rounding up dissidents. And I don't see any difference in rounding up in that and rounding up people who want to burn the flag.
Oh, there's significant difference. Significant difference. First of all, what you're saying is that the flag represents the freedom to burn it. There's no historical or legal precedent for such a statement. It just doesn't exist. And second of all, there's a big difference between the communist government running around rounding up dissidents in China and the American people using their Article 5 rights of the Constitution to push for a redress of grievances. See, there's a difference between grassroots level Americans, 80% of them who want the flag protected and do not believe that this is a violation of the free speech provisions of the First Amendment, versus the federal government running around doing things. So you're comparing apples and oranges there.
Well, no, sir, because the Supreme Court, you want to talk about the principles of the government, the Supreme Court, the supreme law of the land, the arbiters of the law of the land have decided this. And I agree with you. You have complete right to...
Well, sure, but there were 5 Supreme Courts before them that found the other way, so which is right?
Well, I mean, if you want to go back in history, slavery was legal at one time. So,
sure.
That's no excuse saying that, we just want to go back to it because it was in the past. I just think that, as I said when I first started, that the fact that somebody burns the flag, to me, it actually reinforces the principles that the flag represents.
Okay, got you. Thanks for your call. Right. You use the figure 80% of the people support this amendment. Where do you get this figure? And this is totally unscientific, but yesterday we happened to be talking about this on the morning show, and we took sort of a semi-little poll, and most of the people agreed with our last caller, and this is a very conservative area. Okay. So where do you get that figure?
Well, the figure actually comes from the period of 1990 to 1997, 5 different polls conducted by Gallup and Worthland. The lowest it dipped was 76, and the highest it went was 83%. And it's very interesting that one of the organizations that is adamantly opposed to this amendment did a survey or a poll, if you will, and used the terms that this would be the first time in history that we've amended the First Amendment, which is an incorrect statement. And even then, they returned a polling result of 60% of the people who said that it was still the right thing to do. So it's an interesting deal to look at this thing. But what you have is approximately 80% of the American people, a number that has stayed relatively consistent for 8 years now, that believe this is the right thing to do, and it's the time for America to do it.
Okay, let's go back to the phones. Hi, you're on the air.
Hi. First off, I'd like to say that I totally agree with the previous caller. This gentleman who is speaking here right now, this guy needs to go back to school and take the 8th grade test for government that we require of all of our students. First thing, it points out very clearly in the Constitution that the Supreme Court's function is to interpret the Constitution. It is the body that says what a certain thing is and what a certain thing means. The other thing is he needs to go back to school and go back and look at American history. The Supreme Court has changed its mind on many different things. I submit to you the case of Plessy versus Ferguson in the 1890s, which essentially upheld all the Jim Crow laws, which was then eventually overturned in a series of Supreme Court rulings in the 1950s and 60s. The other thing that I would say has to do with your argument that you're not going to be changing the First Amendment. Yes, you are going to be changing the First Amendment. What has established the restrictions of the First Amendment freedom of speech issue, as was pointed out earlier, that Ron has certain restrictions that he has when he is being a reporter and such. A lot of these restrictions have essentially been established by the Supreme Court itself in the interpretation of what is freedom of speech. And right now, I have far more faith in the governmental body called the United States Supreme Court than I do in a fanatic such as this gentleman. Thank you very much.
Then you have more faith in the Supreme Court than you do in the citizens of this country. Say. Now that's he left, didn't he?
Yeah, he did.
Yeah, but it's the Supreme Court's role is to interpret the law, but the people's role is to tell their government what kind of laws they want. And this is the thing. I guess what I would like to say to all of the people who disagree with this, the fact of this is the Senate. When the Senate passes this, when they vote, it's still got to come to the states for ratification. Are we afraid of passing this in the Senate and letting the states, letting the people actually decide this issue? What's there to fear of the people?